Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Aminar Unpacking PPP Forgiveness 2.0. As we promised you, we would provide updated forgiveness as new guidance arrived. And lucky for us, the SBA and Treasury Department released some new guidance on Friday night. Please post your questions after the prepared remarks in the Q&A only. A recording of this webinar and slides will be posted shortly on our community site at realtime.inc.com. And later in this day, we will email a copy to participants. Quickly about myself, I am the founder and CEO of MultiFunding. I'm an Inc. columnist writing regularly on business lending issues. I've advised prior administrations as well as the Federal Reserve about the state of the business loan markets. I have a book out called The Growth Dilemma, and for my EO friends out there, I'm a proud member of EO Philadelphia. My lawyers asked me to read a few disclaimers. We are in an unprecedented time in history, and the information available to us is changing rapidly. Please refer to our most current presentation for education. The information provided is based upon our best judgment about what we know at this time. However, key questions remain about how to implement this program. MultiFunding LLC does not accept any liability as it relates to the timeliness or content of the information we are sharing today or may share in the future. And we are under no legal duty to update any such information or recommendations. And we encourage you to check in with your attorneys, CPAs, and financial advisors for additional insights. Now that I've made the lawyers happy, let's begin. I want to give you some context. This is a highly fluid situation. Negotiation is underway right now in the Senate and the House that could literally throw everything I'm telling you out of the window. However, that being said, nothing could change at all, and we can only go off of what we know today. The earliest forgiveness applications will be accepted 56 days after your PPP was dispersed. So if you got your PPP money in the very first tranche, your applications could be due real soon. And as new information emerges, we promise you and commit to you that we will keep providing updated information to the community as we have it. I want to remind everyone that they have to look at and think about the intent of the PPP, which was to provide you with 2 months of forgivable payroll expense, assuming you keep your people employed during the time, and to provide you with forgivable rent, utilities, and interest during this time, assuming that these expenses do not exceed 25% of your total forgiveness. The first and foremost agenda of the PPP was designed to help you keep your people in place. And if you didn't do that for whatever reason, the amount of forgiveness that you get will be dinged. This is important and this is new. You will apply for forgiveness at your PPP lender where you got the application. That lenders will have up to 60 days to review your application and submit it to the SBA. After that, the SBA has up to 90 days to approve or deny the request, and there will be some audits of some files. So the whole PPP loan review process for forgiveness could take up to 150 days. Which, considering the fact that principal and interest payments are due starting in month 7, it's pretty important that yet the way this is currently constructed, you get your application in within 30 days of your PPP forgiveness time being over, or the first 2 months being over. It is also important to know, and this is new, that if you received an EIDL advance or grant, this amount will be reduced from your forgiveness amount of your PPP. So let's say you have an application in for $180,000 of PPP forgiveness, but you received an EIDL advance of $10K, the amount of forgiveness you will be able to get will actually be $170,000. Let me try to give you a framework to consider. Please, for a minute, take the 25% that everyone's focused on out of your mind, because that's sort of an artificial barrier in a way. When you applied, you should have gotten 10 weeks of your eligible payroll amount. And you're only eligible for 8 weeks of forgiveness. If you did not deviate from your payroll at all and you paid people exactly as you did last year, you have 2 weeks of extra surplus or 20% to apply to rent, utilities, and interest on your building. Let me give you some examples. So let's say you were approved for a $100,000 PPP covering 10 weeks of allowable payroll expenses. You spent $80,000 on 8 weeks of payroll during the allowable 8-week period, which is exactly the amount according to what you did in the comparable time last year. Then you have up to $20,000 left to spend on rent, utilities, and interest. If you spent less than $15,000 on these categories, you will have a small business balance due on your loan. And if you spent more than $20,000 on these categories, you will have the $20,000 and your entire PPP forgiven. So let's just show it in some examples. Example number one is a company with the application for 2.5 times of payroll or $100,000. And this company spent to the penny $80,000 on payroll, and their allowable spend on RUI, rent, utilities, and interest was $15,000. That makes their total forgiveness ask $95,000. If this company had an EIDL advance of $10,000, that would give them a forgiveness ask of $85,000, and they would have a loan balance of $15,000. Another example of a company that also the same loan advance, but they spent $20,000 on rent, utilities, and interest, and $80,000 on payroll. This application would be 100% forgiven, and they would have $0 of loan balance. Just remember that irrespective of whether the money is forgiven or not, you only agreed when you signed the initial loan documents to use the eligible money for payroll, costs, rent, interest on your mortgage or utilities. And it is imperative that you keep methodical records on your expenses. What are the allowable payroll costs for forgiveness? You can use forgiveness for compensation to employees in the form of salary, wages, commissions, or similar compensation. Cash tips are the equivalent. These will need to be based on your employer records of past tips, or in the absence of such records, a reasonable good faith employer estimate of such tips, and payment for vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave. Allowance for separation or dismissal, payment for the provision of employee benefits consisting of group healthcare coverage, including insurance premiums and retirement. Payment of state and local taxes assessed on compensation of employees. For an independent contractor or sole proprietor, wages, commissions, income, or net earnings from self-employment or similar compensation, these are all allowable payroll costs for forgiveness. In addition, and this is new, furloughed employees' salary, wages, or commissions during the covered period are eligible for forgiveness. And if an employee's total compensation does not exceed $100,000 on an annualized basis, the employee's hazard pay and bonuses are eligible for loan forgiveness also. Some clarifications that came out in the newest guidance on Friday night. For owner partners or self-employed individuals, there's a maximum of $15,835 per individual in total across all businesses. So if you own 3 businesses, you cannot get $15,338 for each business. You can get it in one-time slot. And this is capped at your 2019 cash compensation, employer retirement, and healthcare contributions. If you got $50,000 and you can only get $7,500 or half of that, you can't earn more proportionally in 2020 than you did in 2019. If you're a Schedule C filer, the amount is capped by the amount of your owner compensation repayments calculated based on the 2019 profit. And if you're a general partner of a firm, this is capped by the amount of your 2019 net earnings from self-employment, reduced by claim section 179 expense deduction, unreimbursed partner expenses, and depletion from oil and gas properties multiplied by 0.9235, so 92% of those reductions. Clarification, and this is new, no additional forgiveness is provided for retirement or health insurance contributions for self-employed individuals, including Schedule C filers and general partners as such expenses are paid out of their net self-employment income. What is not included? Any compensation of an employee whose principal place of residence is not the United States. Compensation of an individual employee in excess of an annual salary of $100,000 prorated as necessary. Federal employment taxes imposed on withheld between February 15th, 2020 and June 30th, 2020, including the employees and employer share of FICA and Railroad Retirement Act taxes, and income taxes required to be withheld from employees, and qualified sick and family leave wages for which a credit is allowed under sections 7001 and 7003 of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. How do you define the covered period? You have two options. One is to take 56 days from when you received your PPP disbursement, and the other two is an alternative covered period, which is 56 days from the date you issued your first payroll after your PPP disbursement. You can evaluate both and decide which one is best for you. What are some of the nuances of the payroll? Payroll costs are considered paid on the day that paychecks are distributed or the borrower originates an ACH credit transaction. Payroll costs are considered incurred on the day that the employee's pay is earned. And payroll costs incurred but not paid during the borrower's last pay period of the covered period are eligible for forgiveness if paid on or before the next regular payroll date. So they do provide you a little flexibility to get a portion of your last payroll in there. For each individual employee, the total amount of cash compensation eligible for forgiveness may not exceed an annual salary of $100,000 as prorated for the covered period. The prorated number is 15,835. You count your payroll costs that were both paid and incurred only once. Owners cannot be paid more on a prorated basis than they were in 2019. What are the eligible non-payroll costs? Your covered mortgage obligations, payment of interest, not including any prepayment or payment of principal, covered rent obligations for the amount, the rent paid during the time, and covered utility payments. And utilities include electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or internet accesses. And eligible non-payroll costs must be paid during the covered period or incurred during the covered period in order to be eligible. These costs cannot exceed 25% of the total forgiveness amount. You cannot count non-payroll costs that were both paid, and you have to count non-payroll costs that were both paid and incurred only once. You cannot double dip. Also, advanced interest payments on your mortgage are not covered. Let's take an example. A borrower's covered period begins on June 1st and ends on July 26th. The borrower pays its May and June electricity bills during the covered period and pays its July electricity bill on August 10th, which is the next regular billing date. The borrower can seek loan forgiveness for its May and June electricity bills because they were paid during the covered period. In addition, you can seek loan forgiveness for the portion of your next bill that is incurred during the covered period. Require that you will make certain certifications when you sign your forgiveness application. You will certify that you were used to pay costs that were eligible for forgiveness only. That's what the money was used for. You will include all applicable reductions due to decreases in the number of full-time equivalent employees and salary hour wage reductions. You will certify that you not include non-payroll costs in excess of 25% of the total amount requested, and you do not include 8 weeks worth of 2019 compensation for any owner, employee, or self-employed individual general partner that is capped at more than at $15,385 per year. Anyone who lies about these attestations and get caught could face civil or criminal fraud charges. What can reduce your forgiveness? If your average FTE count during the period reduced, your forgiveness will be reduced. If you reduced your pay of any employee by more than 25%, it will be reduced. And in each of these instances, you must walk through quite complex calculations to determine how your forgiveness will be impacted. And we encourage you to do this with your CPA or advisor. How are the reduction in FTE determined? if the average number of FTE employed during the covered period versus how you're comparing the period you're comparing it to previously is down, your forgiveness will go down. So if you had 10 FTE in the prior period and you have 8 FTE in this period, your forgiveness, whole entire forgiveness down will go down by 20%. This is new. How do you calculate FTE? Full-time equivalent employees means an employee who works 40 hours or more on average per week. The hours of employees who work less than 40 hours are calculated proportionally. So say you have an employee who works 20 hours, that is half a credit in FTE count. Any positions for which you made a good faith written offer to rehire an employee during the covered period or the alternative payroll covered period and was rejected by the employee will not hurt you on and give you an exemption for that reduction of that FTE. However, and this is new, you do have an obligation to inform the applicable state unemployment insurance office of the employee's rejected offer of reemployment within 30 days of the employee's rejection of the offer. There are some exemptions for reduction of FTE. Any employees who during the covered period were fired by cause, voluntarily resigned, or voluntarily requested and received a reduction of their hours will not hurt you. The borrower that restored its FTE employees levels by not later than June 30th, 2020 to its FTE levels in the borrower's pay period that included February 15th, 2020. So if you don't bring them back, but you bring them back on or before June 30th, you will get an exemption for that amount of reduction in your forgiveness amount. There are also penalties for reductions in salaries. Let's say you paid somebody last year $10,000 in the applicable period, and this year you paid them $7,500. That's okay because it's at a cap of 25%. However, if you pay that same person $5,000, that extra $2,500 will count for the amount. Let's take some examples. Let's say somebody made a PPP loan amount of $100,000 or 2.5 times their payroll. They spent exactly $80,000 on payroll, and they spent on rent, utilities, and interest $15,000, which is under 25% of their ask. They have no problem. They will make a request of $95,000, should get a grant of $95,000, and have a loan balance of $5,000. If that same person was in the high rent district and spent $25,000 in rent, utilities, and they couldn't apply for all of that, but they could apply for 20% of that, or 20,000 of that, because the forgiveness grant cannot be more than their loan. The forgiveness grant would be $100,000 and their loan balance would be $0. Example 3 is a little bit more complicated. This company also got the PPP loan amount, but they spent $60,000 on their payroll. They spent $15,000 on rent, utilities, and interest, and they had no safe harbor adjustments. Negative adversely, so their total forgiveness request would be $75,000 and their loan balance would be $75,000. But this particular company didn't meet the safe harbor requirements, and so they have safe harbor adjustments of $18,750, and their forgiveness granted would be $56,250, and their loan balance is $43,750. I'm not going to go through this in detail today, but there is a long, we will share this in the slides. This details all the documents that you'll be required to back up everything. Everything has to be carefully and methodically backed up, including about your FTE, your payroll, your tax expenses, and there are your leases, your mortgage payments, interest payments, all your utility bills. All of this will have to be included in the package you provide to your lender. And there are additional requirements that you have to keep but do not have to submit, and you're required to keep these for at least 6 years. MultiFunding is setting up a group of CPA partners to assist business owners through the PPP forgiveness process. If you're not comfortable with your CPA and want to go to someone who's specializing in this, you can feel free to reach out. This seminar will be emailed to you and posted on the community site. and additional R&Rs will be announced on as significant new information becomes available, as we've committed and done for you today. Now I'm going to ask the moderators to take questions. We're going to move slowly and methodically and do our best to help you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Let's get right into your questions. Mike is asking, in regard to utilities, can an annual AC service contract be considered?
I don't think so. I think you could consider 1/6 of that, but not the annual thing.
How long after the end date do you have to submit forgiveness documents?
I haven't seen anything that gives you a timeline when you have to submit it, but remember that if you take longer than a month to submit it, your principal and interest payments starting at month 7 will become due. And while those will be reimbursed eventually, if that amount is forgiven, you'll have that impact on cash flow. So the way it is presently constructed is in your incentive to get the forgiveness process done within 30 days of your 8-week period coming due.
Do you think 1099s under similar compensation to a group of people who T-State consider employees in regard to workman's comp? I think he meant to say who the state considers employees in regard to workman's comp.
I'm sorry, I think that's something you'll have to check with your accountant.
Can you give a bonus to owners on payroll check?
I think you can, but again, the total owner's compensation, the compensation isn't looked at in aggregate, it's looked at on an individual basis. So one owner or one individual cannot earn more than 15,835 of forgiveness.
Paul's asking, is owner compensation paid on K1 considered approved payroll expense, and is it forgivable?
Again, I believe that those are subject to the general partner or owner requirements and caps. Some of it is forgivable and some of it is not, but it's at a cap of 15,835 per person, and one owner or general partner cannot get that from multiple companies. You can only get it once.
What's the possibility that Congress will pass an extension for payroll expenses beyond the 8 weeks?
There's a lot of discussion and noise about it, but I don't believe anything until I see it. And again, if they do that, all this could change, which is the point I tried to make to you guys earlier, that we're sort of at the mercy of a very fluid environment here. What we're reporting is what is known today, but literally by tomorrow, a lot of this could be outdated. That's why it's important to continuously check in and see where things stand.
Vivian is questioning the 75-25 ratio. She says, during the last session, we talked about the 75-25 ratio that was set for forgiveness eligibility. She says she's been reading that payroll costs should be at least 75%. That indicates to her that it could be more than that, and that the key point is at least 75%. What are your thoughts?
I think you're absolutely correct about that. It's a minimum of 75%, but it can be higher. So let's say your payroll has increased during this period. As long as your payroll costs that you're submitting are eligible, like no one's over $100,000 or things like that, it's possible that someone might submit an application for 100% payroll forgiveness or 95% payroll forgiveness. And there's nothing I've read in the rules that says that's not okay.
As a continuation to that question, if we pay a bonus for June every year, can we pay the bonuses using PPP money? And how would you prove that?
And I think you can, but you have to be careful that not one individual's total compensation on the PPP application is higher than 15.8.
Jacob's asking, I'm an independent contractor with no LLC or corporation. Can I pay myself the amount I was approved for per month for 2 months and have that amount forgiven up to $15,000, of course?
I don't see any reason, Jacob, I don't see any reason why you can't do that.
Mike's clarifying, has workman's comp specifically been included as part of forgiveness?
Mike, I believe it's acceptable, but I'm not 100% certain, and I would check that with your CPA.
We have debt relief from SBA. Will we still be allowed to claim rent and mortgage expenses out of 25% of the PPP loan?
The rent has nothing to do with it. And the mortgage, if your SBA loan, it depends what your mortgage loan is. So if your SBA loan is purely a mortgage and you didn't pay them during the time because you had forgiveness, then you can include it. Forgiveness is only for expenses that you incurred during the time.
Do we have any idea if alarm systems are allowable under a utility?
I don't think they are, but maybe your CPA will allow it. I'm not sure.
Jeff's asking a very specific question with regards to payroll. He's saying they pay biweekly, 4/12 to 4/15, with payroll payments on the 1st. They got funded on 4/20. Can we use an alternative payroll cover period starting at 4/26? And that
Yeah,
means
I believe you'd have to calculate it, but that's in your favor. As long as it's the next one up from when you got the PPP money, that should be acceptable.
a specific scenario, people, someone received their disbursement on May 1st. Their city was still under safe at home orders until May 11th. So they didn't bring back their staff until that date. Will they be penalized for skipping the first week of payroll during that time period?
I'm sorry, guys, sometimes you have to do mental math in your head for this. As long as the total compensation of your employees during the time period is not more than 25% reduction on it was last year, and as long as your number of FTE is the same, you should be okay.
Sarah's asking a question, how EIDL and PPP relate to each other. If you use an EIDL grant money for rent after the PPP 8 weeks, but had used PPP money for rent during that period, is that a proper use of EIDL grant money?
I don't think it's an issue as long as you're not double dipping, you're not using the money twice. Remember though, that what did come out as a bit of a surprise to me in the Friday night's guidance was that if you got an EIDL advance, say for $10,000, that amount will be deducted from your PPP forgiveness application, and in fact turn into a loan. So it's sort of a quasi grant. You will have to pay it back over 2 years.
For an employee receiving an hourly wage, if their dollars per hour were not cut, but their hours were cut from 25 to 15 per week, would they have received a greater than 25% pay cut Is the wage based on the rate or the gross income?
I'm sorry, I'm not 100% sure how to count that, but because when you do your FTE count, if that employee was getting, say, 25 hours, the same comparable period last year, and is now getting 15 hours comparably this year, that reduction in hours will reduce your total FTE count.
Scott's question is about when this new information came out. Is it the same as a week ago? And this is information that came out Friday evening, the 22nd, if I'm correct, Tommy, if you want to verify that.
Yeah, I'm sharing with, I mean, we're going off two tranches of information now. One came out, I believe, on the 15th, and the second tranche came out on the 22nd. And there'll be more. It's just what we have so far.
Flora is saying she had calculated all the administrative costs for benefits, but now she hears they're not allowed. Is that true? And can you shed any light on that?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by administrative costs, so I don't know how to answer that.
Laura, if you want to try and get back to us with that information, we can maybe try and help you. Olga said, if we terminate employees prior to the covered period, but pay severance during that covered period, should these employees be included in the total head count?
I'm sorry, I'm not 100% sure. You'd have to ask your accountant that. Guys, I just want to say, if I don't know an answer to something, or I'm not sure, I'd rather tell you I'm not sure than BS you. And first of all, I'm a loan guy. I'm not a CPA. And so what's starting to happen in this is that I really almost need a CPA on these with me, because a lot of it is quite complicated tax stuff that's not really my expertise. That's number one. And number two, I guarantee you that there's some scenarios that you're thinking about here that people just don't know the answers to yet and are not sure. So when something is clear to me, I'm going to tell you I'm clear. And when I'm not certain, I'm going to tell you I'm not certain. And it's just the way it is. So.
What if someone spent less than 75% on payroll? Does it still get forgiven?
It's not a binary answer. Your payroll, how much pay, it's not tied to the 75%. The amount of forgiveness will be impacted in how your payroll expense compares to what you applied for and what reductions you made in payroll during the time. So it doesn't, and that deduction will impact the forgiveness depending on how significant. It could impact the forgiveness significantly.
We have an S Corp for which got PPP loan. We also got $1,000 as an EIDL grant for their LLC. They want to know whether they need to show this EIDL grant when applying for forgiveness for the PPP loan.
You must, you're required by law, if you got an EIDL grant, to put it on your PPP forgiveness application. And that amount will be reduced from your total forgiveness amount.
Michael's saying, I set up a separate bank account for my PPP funds. How important is it to show PPP money being used in real time as payroll or other expenses as they're paid? Or can I reconcile and move that money over to my checking account toward the end of the process?
I think everything you can do to methodically track your expenses in the 4 allowable categories until such time as you've hit the total amount of your PPP loan is actually absolutely a smart idea. You want to keep church and state quite separate and keep a very clean audit trail. And then when you're done, but you have to do that for the initial period.
Charles is asking, are contributions to our ESOP considered eligible payroll costs?
Charles, I'm not sure. You'll have to check with your CPA.
So Fernando's saying we did not get the EIDL advance, but we did get an EIDL loan. Would that have to be included in the forgiveness application?
No. However, do keep in mind that you did agree not to use the EIDL loan and the PPP loan for the same thing. So you do have to make sure that you have track record of specifically using money for separate things, because it could come back to bite you if they found that you double dipped on the money. That's not allowed.
For safe harbor FTE calculation, does an employer need to inform the state unemployment department if the employee denies to return to work?
Yes, within 30 days. You need to keep documentation of that.
There's just several similar questions here. I'm trying to not repeat them, so forgive me for the pause. Todd's asking, if an employee resigns 4 weeks into the 8-week period, how's that position treated for credit towards the full-time calculation? For example, can we count them as a full-time employee for the entire period, or only 4 weeks of that whole 8-week period?
I believe that as long as they resigned, you're okay, and you can count them for the whole 8-week period. But again, that's a pretty nuanced question that I would check with your CPA on.
Can you please clarify the alternate covered period? A specific example, their PPP was distributed on Monday, May 4th. They issued payroll on Friday, the 8th for work done during the April 19th to the 3rd, which is the 2 weeks prior. The next payroll date is May 22nd. What's the latest start date that they can claim the alternative pay period?
I think the latest start date would be on that Friday afterwards, but what I would do is I would run both scenarios, see which one is more advantageous to you, and then I would check the math with your CPA or advisor and see which one they're more comfortable.
If the owner has 2 separate businesses and she takes a salary from each business of $100K, how do you account for this with the PPP forgiveness?
You can only apply for forgiveness from one business, not for both. And each individual's with their social security number, I believe, will be included in the PPP applications. You have to break it down by person, so that will likely get caught and be an audit flag.
Let's see, is there something recent about needing to spend 75% of the loan on payroll or nothing is forgiven?
I've never heard anything like that. Anybody having fun yet? Isn't this fun? Sorry. Trying to bring a little light to this mess of a situation we're all in.
If we don't use all the money from the PPP, can we pay that back, or does that have to be made into a loan?
You can pay it back at any time you want to without any prepayment penalty.
Okay, can we not use the upfront EIDL money on reducing the amount we need to pay back to the SBA for the EIDL loan?
Sorry, I don't understand that question.
We seem to keep getting this question about workman's comp, so maybe we can just answer it one more time. Are workman's comp costs part of forgiveness?
Yeah, so I think they are, but clearly there's something vague about it because it keeps coming up. So what I would rather do is research that, and I'll write about it in one of my posts to all of you, or put it up in our community, because I don't want to give you a wrong answer.
Does holiday payday like Memorial Day fall into the forgivable vacation, sick leave, family leave category?
I think it's fine just as long as that day falls into your 60-day period or your 56-day period.
Chuck's asking if you can say a little bit more about how Schedule C filers will need to calculate forgiveness.
Chuck, bear with me 1 second. It will be capped amount of your owner compensation replacement calculated based on 2019 net profit. So it'll be basically what proportion of your net profit in 2019 what basically became your owner's compensation at a cap of up to 100 grand annually a year, and then 2 months of that.
If you received an EIDL grant and loan greater than the amount of PPP, will you not receive forgiveness?
The EIDL loan has nothing to do with it. It's purely your grant. And if your grant that you received was higher than your PPP amount, then you're not going to receive any forgiveness.
For an organization that decides not to pursue forgiveness, will they just work with the lending bank to repay the loan?
I think so, and some organizations might throw up their hands and say that's easier.
What if you use more than the expected amount on payroll? We are able to use 100% of the money on payroll during the 8-week period. Therefore, will the 100% be forgiven?
I think that'll be fine, just as long as that $100,000 is within the cap. So if that included 3 people who earned an equivalent of $500,000, annually, that part's not going to be forgiven. So as long as it's within the $100,000 cap, that should be completely forgiven.
If in 2019 an owner in an S corp made $0, can we pay that owner a salary in the covered PPP period and get forgiveness?
I don't think so. I don't think it can exceed what that owner earned in 2019. But I would check that with your accountant.
Are healthcare and retirement cost added to the maximum amount stated for owner/employees?
No additional forgiveness is provided for retirement or health insurance contributions for self-individual employees, including Schedule C filers and general partners, as such expenses are paid out of their net self-employment income. If you are a owner, partner, or self-employed individual, then they can be added above that amount.
You elect to utilize the alternative covered period for payroll. Does that mean all non-payroll expenses are also based on incurred/paid? Or do those expenses still use the covered period from disbursement date?
I believe it's all based on, I don't believe you can have one. I think you have to pick one and keep it consistent.
It's asking an interesting question that I'm not sure we have an answer to, but you may have some guidance. How much are the CPAs charging to assist business owners through PPP forgiveness process?
So I think that's going to depend on the CPA, and I think it's going to be expensive. In other words, I think it's going to be only I think it's going to take a lot of work for the CPAs to do this, and I think they are going to charge fair prices for it. Unfortunately, I know some of them charged for PPP help and others didn't, but this forgiveness time is going to take this is going to take quite some time to work on.
Ariel's asking, can I hire new employees and pay them with the PPP money?
I believe you absolutely can.
And continuation to that question, how about if an employee works for two separate businesses and is paid for both? If they make the 100K prorated at each, are both salaries forgivable? She is not an owner.
I think if those businesses have similar ownerships or control across businesses, then you have a problem and that you cannot do that. I think if that employee has one job at company A in Pennsylvania and another job at company B in California that has absolutely no affiliation with that, then that's probably okay. But it's kind of hard to imagine how that would work. That could potentially trigger a fraud alert.
Is salary the net check paid to the employee? Do owners' comp distributions normally taken in addition to their salary?
I'm sorry, one more time, Kate.
So Chuck's saying, is salary the net check paid to the employee? I guess he's asking
You have to
the
take into
amount is net.
you have to work on that with your CPA, and some of that includes the amount and all that. So there are some deductions.
I just to clarify on the $100,000 salary, the amount is 15,385. I know there was one of the slides that the 8 and the 3 were transposed. So clarifying that amount is 15,385.
I believe that is correct.
We get this question a lot. Maybe we can just answer it one more time today. What happens if you have employees that are making more on unemployment and do not want to come back to work?
Then again, you will be able to apply for you will have a safe harbor exemption against them. You will not be forgiveness for the amount that you didn't pay them, but it won't reduce you won't be penalized over in addition to what you paid your other employees, but you do have to provide that documentation to the government and to the state unemployment office. You have an obligation to do that.
And asking for clarification that she's been told that if an employee works 30 hours a week, that would be considered full-time. Do we know if that's correct?
I don't think so. That would be considered 3/4 time based on the new regulations.
Kelly's saying that she's a little confused on the EIDL grant, that she received one but did not use it for payroll as she had received PPP. Do I have to deduct the EIDL grant money from the forgivable amount of the PPP loan?
You do.
Is there any guidance for home-based businesses and whether we can use the same allocation used for a home office on a tax return from the likes of mortgage interest and utilities?
I haven't seen, I'm sure it will come out, but I haven't seen any of that yet. Folks, I'm going to have to wrap this up. It's just in like 2 or 3 minutes to get ready for a 6 o'clock call. I just want to remind you that we will be sending out a copy of this webinar or Aminar to all of you later today, as well as a copy of the recording so that you can keep it and share it with your friends or your community if you want to. We will also be posting it on our website at realtime.inc.com. And so that's another resource for you. And we do commit that we will keep these up as new and meaningful information comes to you. So we are not going to do these every day. We are just going to, as new information becomes available, we'll do it. I'm going to encourage everyone, because a lot of this is very complex and not perfectly clear, and don't take everything you hear here as black and white. Get opinions. Go talk to your CPA or your local advisor about it. If you want CPAs to talk to, we can provide them to you as well. But you need to commit time to working on this and figuring it out. And this is not going to be a 5 or 10 minute process. This is not going to be nearly as quick or simple as your PPP application. And that's just the sad truth of the whole mess. And with that, Kate, unless there are any real significant questions that we've missed, I'd like to wrap it up, because unfortunately I have another presentation I got to give starting in 3 minutes.
No, I think we're in good shape. A lot of very specific questions based on people's individual circumstances that unfortunately will take up a lot of time to really kind of get into. So why don't we suggest that everybody continue to use Tribe, our community group, and post your questions there. We do have people that are on staff that are answering those questions, so that would be a good place to revisit and post your questions.
Thank everybody. We wish you a great night. Thank you so much. Take care now. Okay. Bye-bye.